I think I got this stream set up and working correctly. Let me double check on my computer here to make sure that it's coming through. Let's see here. I'm not seeing it right off the bat. There it is. There it is. Okay. So, welcome again. This is Dr. B Music Theory. Sorry for starting a couple minutes late. I was trying to do something new where I was putting some of the links into the description ahead of time, but something went wrong and it got a little bit messed up. So I will be sure to put all links that I'm referring to into the description after I'm all done with this live session. So I welcome you all, and I'm hoping that people will be logging in shortly here. And so please feel free to say hello in the chat. What I'll be doing is I'll be talking about a few things beforehand, and then I will open it up for questions as I normally do. So hopefully Elton Wilde signs in, who's been a common viewer, who's been on a lot of these, and every time Elton asks in the chat whether I could go over and analyze the love theme from the movie, 1988 movie, Cinema Paradiso. And today is that day. Let me just write out the name of that movie, Cinema Paradiso. So it's a movie. It's you might think at the first time 1988. That's so long ago. Is it still any good? I haven't watched it in years, but it was. When I watched that movie, I loved it. I thought it was something very different, something very unique, and I was struck by how good the score for this film was. And I started listening to that score again, and I forgot how much saxophone is actually used in the film score. And since saxophone is my primary instrument, it's no surprise that I love it as much as I do. That said, there's a lot of people that really love the music to this score, and there's good reason for it. It has some beautiful, beautiful elements. So we're going to look at the love theme, and when you're listening to the score, and you're listening to the soundtrack rather, there's two different versions of it. It happens at two different times. So make sure you look for both of them, because both of them, it's the same melody, but it has some different orchestration and some different elements involved. So look for both versions of the love theme when you're looking this up after this video. So if you happen to be watching this video after the fact, then this might be a good place to pause and listen to this music. So I put up the first major phrase up here on the board, and it has kind of depending on which version you're talking about, it has a kind of introduction that has, it almost sounds very like Aaron Copland. It has these open voicings and has these upper structures that come in and out and fade in, and it's all kind of ethereal and just hovers there and floats. And then in the first version of it, a solo clarinet comes and plays this melody. And it's a gorgeous melody. So let me play it for you here on the piano, kind of a slower version of it, just so that you can hear it. So that's the initial statement of the melody. And after that, it goes back, and then a solo flute plays the melody. So let's start digging in. Let's start digging in and analyzing it. Let's start first by, let me play it again and kind of talk through some of the elements here. So what key are we in? It looks like G minor, right? we start on the G minor, we get to the end of the phrase, we got a D7, which would be a D7 flat 9, which is essentially our 5-7 chord with an upper structure to give a little bit more tension to intensify the resolution back to the 1 chord. So we are in the key of G minor. So we start, but we very quickly move, and it's important to remember as a student of music theory, you have a key signature, 2 flats. It has a relative minor and a relative major. And that the word relative refers to having the same key signature. So this is either in G minor, based on the key signature, or B flat major. And I'm pointing out the B flat major right here in the 3rd measure, specifically because very often a piece of music can kind of shift back and forth between the relative minor and the relative major. And you do have that working on in this exact example, that shift. So let's take a first look at harmonically. 1 chord, 4 chord, or 4-7 chord, depending on which version of this sheet music wise. Sometimes you'll see it written as just a C minor triad, sometimes C minor 7. Keep in mind, the real final verdict is based on the recording. So when you look at sheet music, be careful. Some of the sheet music is not as accurate. The first one I looked at had just a C minor, and I'm really hearing, I'm pretty certain that C minor 7 is what you're really hearing in the orchestral version for the soundtrack. So just a word of warning, when you're looking for sheet music, always check by listening and seeing if you can develop your ears so that you can really pick out to make sure that the chords that are being written out for you are accurate. So we start here on our 1 chord, we go to a 4-7, and that 4-7 can function as a 4-7 in our G minor or a 2-7 in the key of the relative major. So it's almost like, if we think about modulation and the idea of pivot chords, a chord that functions one way in the key that was happening before it and another way in the key that's coming forward. So I would say that this would be a great example where it functions like a 4-7 in the key of G minor, but it functions like a 2-7 in the key of B flat major. So it kind of has that functionality right there. And so it does it right away. We start clearly G minor, and then this sounds like a 4-7, but it's going to transform into a 2-7, 5-7, 1 chord. All right, so that then this becomes 5-7 and 1 in the key of B flat. And then we just kind of go back into that 1 chord, right? We just go back, the 1 chord in G minor, that is. Descending bass line, a minor 5 chord, getting us to 6 major 7. Back to our 4-7. 2 half diminished 7. And this would be a 7 diminished 7 of 1. Back to our G minor 1. And this is really just a passing chord, the bass passing note in the bass. Back to our 6 major 7. Then this diminished 7, which I'll talk about in a minute. 5-7 with a sus4, and then to the actual 5-7. So this is temporarily in B flat right here. We go back to 1. This is a 5-6. We're going to 6 major 7. 4-7, which we've had before, but this time it doesn't lead us into B flat major. Then here the A half diminished 7 is 2 half diminished 7. The F sharp 7 is 7 diminished 7. Sometimes you'll look at it and you'll see it written as a D7 flat 9, and this is a really common relationship that you should be aware of. Let me just make a little space here, right? So a D7 flat 9 would be D, F sharp, A, C, and the flat 9 is an E flat. So we're going 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. This is, again, we're stacking thirds and stacking them. You know, your triad is often your basic sonority. Having a 7th chord, and this one uses a lot of them, gives it this kind of more rich harmonic palette, very much coming out of a French impressionist jazz feeling. And then the upper structures, your 9s, are on top of that. But the relationship between a D7 flat 9 and an F sharp diminished 7 are very similar. F sharp diminished 7 is F sharp, A, C, E flat. You can see that the majority of the chord, F sharp diminished 7 and D7 flat 9, are the same. A D7 in this context would be the 5 of our G minor. The F sharp diminished 7 is the 7 diminished of our G minor chord. So both of them fit the harmonic progressions that are very common in tonal music. And sometimes you might have different versions depending on what time through the piece you're going, right? So like when the clarinet plays it, it might be the F sharp diminished, and when the flute plays it, maybe it's the D7 flat 9. You know, as they repeat it for variation, you might, because they're so similar, you can make those variations so that it's a little bit different, but it's still functionally the same thing. So we go back to our 1 chord here, G minor over F in the bass. This is just basically, like, you could say it's a 1-4-2, but it's really like a passing tone, getting us back to our 6 major 7. And then this is going to be our 5 chord, 5-7 chord. It has a suspension in there, and then it has an upper structure that's added. So let's talk about the E diminished 7. At first blush, you're like, well, E flat, going up a half step to E diminished, you know, wouldn't you expect it to go up to some kind of F natural in the bass, right? So when you hear, well, first off, there's no F in this key, so that would be a little unusual. And the thing to remember about fully diminished 7 chords is that they're all stacked minor thirds. And even when you kind of get to the top of it and you go enharmonically, you'll have an enharmonic minor third. So an E diminished would be E, G, B flat, D flat, right? And so D flat to E, if we loop around from the 7th back to the root, D flat to E would be an augmented third. An augmented second, technically, but an augmented second is enharmonically the same as a minor third. So you can say E to G is a minor third, G to B flat, minor third, B flat to D flat, minor third. D flat to E is an augmented second, but if we changed it and made it C sharp to E, right? So instead of calling it D flat, let's call it C sharp. C sharp to E would be your minor third. So because of that symmetry, and it's all the kind of like the same interval, you could say, well, what if this E diminished 7 was really not an E diminished 7, but an inversion of, let's say, a C sharp diminished 7, right? So instead of, we're having, and let's just say it's in first inversion, and really it's a C sharp diminished 7. A C sharp diminished 7 would make a lot of sense in terms of our traditional harmonic progressions. It would be 7 diminished 7 of 5. And so in this case, we could almost call this E diminished 7, even though it's not written this way. We could analyze it as a 7 diminished 6-5 of 5. So we could actually kind of pretend that it's really a C sharp diminished 7 with E in the bass. And just listen to that progression. We have now, what would happen if we put it as in a root position as a C sharp diminished 7? It would sound like this. So let me do that again, because those are very similar, but they're subtly different. And Music is about the subtleties of emotions between these subtle music theoretical differences. So again, here's what's with the E diminished. Here's with it as C sharp diminished. Let me do that again, the C sharp diminished one. It feels differently because this feels like we're going to go somewhere. We're going to keep going up, but then it falls back. And that falling back, you know, the E flat to the E natural, we're expecting it to keep rising, right? That's our expectation, but it falls back, it falls down to the D, and then they have the sus, which falls to the 4, falls to the 3, and the D falls back to the G. So it kind of sets us up, you know, it sets us up as if we're going to go up, and then we fall to the D, the sus falls to the D7, the D7 falls into the G minor. So you get this kind of uplift of like expectation, and then things just fall down with this weight. You're sinking into it. And I think that is emotionally a very strong way to structure it. So let's take a look again at what we have in terms of harmony. And again, we're going to analyze it from as many perspectives as we can, including melodically, rhythmically, all of those things. But here we have 1, 4, 7, then functioning as a 2, 7, 5, 7, 1 in B flat. Back to our minor 1, minor 5, 6, 6 major 7, 4, 7, 2 half diminished 7, 7 diminished 7, 1, 6 major 7, 7 diminished 6, 5 of 5, and then we go back to. So from a harmonic standpoint, this is actually fairly textbook. 1 to 4, super common. 4 becomes 2, that's pretty common. 2, 5, 1, super common. This 1 going back to the minor 1. This kind of third, B flat to G is a third relationship, so that's common. If this was our B flat key, this would be 1 going to 6, which is a common progression. 5, 6 as a passing chord. 1 to minor 5 is uncommon. That's not common, but it's as a passing chord, it's not uncommon. So that's a little uncommon there. The frequency of seventh chords, right? 4, 7 / 2, 7, the 6 major 7. That's a little unusual, but not for certain styles of music. In terms of the harmonic progression, 1 passing chord to 6, super common. 6 to 4, common. 4 to 2, common. 2 to 7 diminished, common. 7 to 1, common. 1 to 6, common. Secondary function to 5, all of that makes a lot of sense. So there's not much in the way of unexpected chord progressions in this, but the uniqueness of the chord progression has to do more with the use of seventh chords, and then a little bit of like just the way in which the root movement, like we talked about the E flat major 7 to E diminished 7 going to D, how it sets an upward expectation that then falls back down. So I think that gives us a good kind of summary of what's happening harmonically. But let's talk about what's going on. Let's actually first talk rhythmically, because there's this 2/4 measure. So it's essentially in 4/4, but there's an extra 2 beats in this whole phrase. And depending on the sheet music you look at, some of it puts that extra 2 beats over here. And so it makes this the 4/4 measure and this the 2/4 measure. And so the question is, phrasing-wise, where does it make sense? Where does it feel like the phrase cadences, and where does it feel like it's just moving forward? We definitely have a cadence on this B flat triad. This sounds like an arrival. So notice, and you know, for you as analyzing melodies and well as composing melodies, notice how it starts with a longer note value, then it moves to faster note values, and then it ends with longer note values. Longer note values, faster note values in the middle, longer note values. That's not the way things always have to be, but this is a very common way, especially longer note values at the end of the phrase. That's super, super common. So with that in mind, I kind of like the idea of the 2/4 measure here. I do think that makes the most sense. So we start with a note, it's kind of declarative. We sit on it for a while, we hold it, and then we immediately have a big leap, right? So that's striking. Declaration, big leap, which gives us some surprise. It leaps down and steps back in the opposite direction, which is what we would expect of a leap. That's normal. And then we leap right back up to that starting note, and then we start filling in that sonic space so that there's not that gaping hole in the middle. And if you want to start thinking about analogies between what I'm talking about theoretically and the idea that this is a love theme, that's the title of it, right? Let's recognize that I can be talking about music theory, and metaphorically and in the terms of the terminology I'm using, we can apply that to the idea of love, right? Declaration, surprise, step back, fill in the gaping hole that was left. And then we continue, we step, and then we have another, this is not really a leap, but it's going through the arpeggio. So also in terms of analyzing, so chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, passing tone, right there, a little passing tone. Chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone. Right here, this E flat, this is a suspension. Classic suspension, prepared by a common tone, resolved down by step. Notice the ratio, the balance between chord tones and non-chord tones. It's overwhelmingly chord tones with just a few choice non-chord tones to give it a little bit more dissonance, and a little bit, which means you can have a little bit more resolution. So again, declaration, surprising leap, step back, back up to that leap, passing, fill in the space, chord tone, leap, and then just jump away from it and leave it hanging. So right here, this is unusual in terms of like your music theory textbooks. Normally the idea is that thirds are kind of like they can kind of be felt like a step. They can kind of feel like a leap because this is in the chord body. So it feels like a small leap, but it's But this certainly the C to the F down to the F. That's a leap. The textbooks, the music theory textbook says if you make a leap, you should step back in the opposite direction, and that's what we did here at the beginning. We leap down, we step back. Here we're doing it down. We're leaping down, but we don't. We kind of keep going down. So the C is kind of like hanging there. And there's all this sonic space between the C and the F that's a hole. But check out what happens, right? As soon as after we do that and we go down but it feels right because we're resolving this harmonically. And then this glorious arpeggio. The glorious arpeggio. It goes D, F, A, C. And oh my goodness, the sky opens, emotionally speaking. We have that space there, and then we fill it in by going up in thirds. And up in thirds, the ear hears that really well. We get this arpeggio. That goes from the third, and this is a non-chord tone. That A is not in the chord, nor is this downbeat C, right? So we've got these And when you hit on that one chord and that C is like there, it's got this yearning quality. And then it finally resolves to the B flat here, and you're like, oh, I mean, it's such a powerful thing. And if we think about where that release of tension is right here on the B flat. We were left hanging at this, on this C all the way back here. And we finally get that C, it's like that step down of the C to resolve, that C, which is like hovering here, and it wants to resolve, right? We have... That's still up in our ear. And then we get it here, and then it resolves. And there's something to be said about delayed gratification. When you have to wait for something, sometimes that moment of resolution is so much sweeter than if you get it right away. And that's really the beautiful genius behind this melody, is that you have this C, and we accept the fact that it doesn't resolve back up right away, because this 5/7 to 1 with a little suspension here is so satisfying, but it's not completely satisfying. We then get this arpeggio. We get a non-chord tone, we get another non-chord tone, and then we finally get that resolution to the B flat. And things are, it's such a huge release of that tension. So right here, we have an A, it's a neighbor tone. Notice that there's we start having a higher number of non-chord tones in the melody as the melody keeps moving forward. Notice that when we had the G minor, B flat was the starting note, and that's a prominent note here, but it's embellished now, right? So the idea of variation. You have some things in common so that things tie together and make sense, but you vary them so that it keeps it interesting. So B flat is the key note on the G minor chord, established from beat 1 of measure 1. But now here we get the upper neighbor to that and the lower neighbor to the B flat. And we get that kind of enclosing of the B flat. And that D is a new high note. We haven't been that high before, right, in terms of pitch level. So it feels like we're springing up. As the bass goes down, the melody soars up, and then it repeats it, and then it jumps down. And so we've done it. We've had this B flat at the beginning, B flat jump down to D. We've had this C jump down to F, and now we have this D jump down to G. The D here, from here. And do we step back right away? We don't. We ornament with a chromatic non-chord tone. It's a neighbor tone, but this time it's not diatonic, it's outside of the key. When making the decision, should I have a diatonic neighbor tone or a chromatic neighbor tone? Diatonic, for the most part, is going to be less tension than chromatic because it's already within the key. So notice again the genius of this melody. The first times we're all up through here. These are all diatonic non-chord tones. This F sharp was our first chromatic non-chord tone, and it keeps a certain intervallic consistency with this B flat. Diatonically, 3, 2, 3 in the key of G minor is a minor second. To keep that minor second, you need to make it chromatic here. So part of the things that will also determine whether you use a chromatic or a diatonic non-chord tone is the intervallic shapes that have already been established as building blocks to your melody. So if you've established minor second, you're gonna want to keep that minor second formula to keep the shape. Just listen to what would happen as if they did it diatonic. We go. It's not bad, but it's different. And then we thought the D was a leap up. We jump all the way up to this F, and that we step back, and we go to the 4 minor 7, which is like power. That's like there's a certain strength and power when we could go to that 4 minor 7. So let's say start again from here. We start with this glorious arpeggio. We get the release of the B flat. and then we kind of jump higher, we leap down, we jump even higher, we get this resolution, but we're not done. This is like the fake climax of the thing. We then get, and then we jump even higher up to the G, and it just starts stepping down, and here's we get this beautiful dissonance. Oh my God, right? The F natural, and this is why they mark it as a courtesy accidental, because you're like, F sharp, you're looking at the music, you're like, shouldn't that be an F sharp? No, it's this, and then we get it to resolve to the 7th, but it's still such a tense harmony, and a passing tone, it keeps moving, and then finally, everything we've been through, and it finally gets back. And then after this, it's dessert. And things wind down and down, down. And then we come back to where we started from. And talk about taking the listener on a journey, a dramatic journey, where we have a high point. This is your hot, this is you can argue in terms of pitch level that G is your climax, your highest note. But this F natural almost is more important because it falls on that strong beat 3. So I really think that we have this D starts us with this idea of leaping up. We then leap up to the F, resolving to the E flat. We then leap up to the G, resolving to that ends up driving to this F, which is really, I think, this is the most intense note of the whole melody. That F natural, which is so dissonant. It's not a member of the chord. And so it's a wonderful note to make the climax of the piece. So actually I shouldn't circle because I'm using different thing. So this G here is the highest pitch. Then the F is a non-chord tone. It repeats that note, which is still a non-chord tone. We get to the E flat, which is a chord tone. The D is a passing tone. So it's kind of like this delayed, this anticipation of a passing tone that then finally gets us. And then when we get to here, it's 3, 3. That's a neighbor tone. This is like an unattached neighbor group. So it's A, F, above and below. Notice that there's no F sharp here, right? We have the G, F sharp here, but here we do have that F natural. And then here, this is kind of like a accented passing tone. But I think it's very important that when we analyze music theory, that we're not just looking at how the harmony works, but also how the melody works from that standpoint. And rhythmically, what we're talking about, this long note, move, 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 slow it down at a cadence, ba da da, then move, 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 do do do, high note with sustained where we hang on it, da, and move, 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 ba, then hang on a higher note, right? The duration, ba dee da, and then it moves to the most intense stuff, and it just keeps moving right through it till we get back to this B flat, and then we kind of have another sustained note. So if we're looking at like where are the duration notes, the longer notes, where is the section where we're not moving as quickly? I think it's important to analyze melodies rhythmically as well to see how the vocabulary works from a rhythmic standpoint. So this part right here, the D is a long note, going up to the E flat, and then when the real climax comes, we just keep moving through it until we get back to that B flat that we had at the beginning, and we really start winding things back down, starting on the last 3 measures. So rhythmically, we want to analyze things, melodically in terms of leaps, and what kinds of non-chord tones are being used, diatonic or chromatic. So there's a lot going on in this, and I think there's a lot more we could talk about, but I think that is a good place for us to kind of take a breather and say that we've got at least a beginning understanding of why this melody was such a hit back when it came out in 1988 for this movie, and why it's withstood the test of time and is a favorite of people still today. Let me just play that again without all the narration so you can just listen to it. And I recommend you go listen to it after this my video here, and listen to the two different versions that exist. And you know, what is it about orchestrationally having it start as a solo clarinet? And what is it about moving it as it intensifies to a solo flute? And what the other versions that, you know, there's other permutations in the two different versions. So just listen and think about what's happening emotionally and how that emotion is being created by the harmonies and the leaps and the melodic shape and the rhythm. So, I hope you enjoyed that. So, let's, oh, Elton Wild is here. Awesome. Well, Elton, you asked, and eventually, you know, I came through for you. Sometimes it takes a little while for me to get prepared and get everything ready, but I'm really glad that you were able to sign in today. Again, Elton's the one who requested it more than once. And I was finally able to oblige, and I'm happy to do so. It's such a gorgeous melody, as you know already. Alex Buffoli, he had, I actually, Holy Beard Batman, Alex writes. Alex was actually a student of mine in person. So you've seen nothing. You should have seen me yesterday. I actually got everything trimmed. It was Grizzly Adams, very, very, very big, but I decided it's time for a little bit more stylized version. All right, I'm going to turn to the chat here. We got, hello, Dr. B, hope you are doing well. Looking forward to this session. Love Cinema Paradiso. Yeah, like I said, a lot of people do, and for very good reason. So I'm so glad to talk about it. Danny Pippin's asking if I can talk about how to use Barry Harris's 6 diminished scale. I'm going to talk about that. Absolutely, Danny. That's the next thing on my list. Doug Hudson here is saying that listening to I'm actually not quite sure how you say his name, Morrison, who's the composer, is what got him into listening to film scores. Yeah, you know, it's what's amazing is, like, a good film score operates on so many levels that it can be so emotionally impactful. We know, as lovers of music, how emotionally impactful music can be. But when you couple that with a story and amazing acting and visuals and costumes, you know, you're able to just keep adding layers and layers of emotion coming from all different art forms. So the idea of film is being this art form that includes, it's really a composite art form that includes so many other different arts. And if they all come together to serve the same emotional goals, it can be incredibly powerful. And film music is a very interesting medium because it is so obviously dedicated to trying to capture the right emotion. One of the things I've been actually watching on Disney Plus is a docuseries on the making of Frozen 2. So Frozen, the Walt Disney animated show, and it's a fascinating docuseries. For those of you who love music, they really do justice to showing part of the process behind what it takes to create a movie musical, a Disney movie musical. So I highly recommend it. It's on Disney Plus, Frozen 2, and you get to see, how they're recording it in the studio, how the composer, the husband and wife composer team go and pitch a song. Some of the songs are like the producers and directors, they don't like it, it's not working, and not like the awkwardness involved and of telling someone who's just spent a bunch, poured their heart and soul into writing a song and being like, yeah, I don't think it works. And they're kind of like, wow, well, I think that went as well as it could have gone, meaning that, boy, that was a tough conversation. But everybody at that table is trying to achieve a certain emotional result and resonance for the audience from the music, from the animation, from the lighting, and it's really fascinating to see that. So the use of music in film is an area that is, I think, really worthy of analysis. And I think as music theory continues, we will continue to analyze the music of great composers like Beethoven and Brahms and Tchaikovsky, but I think we are going to start adding some of these other composers, these film composers of pieces like Cinema Paradiso and a lot of this great film music that is being written during our time that owes a huge debt to the classical music tradition of those composers that I mentioned, but is now starting to find just subtle ways to create variety and do something a little bit different to keep it fresh, to keep it relevant to today's sensibilities. And so I think that's fascinating to examine. So Danny, I'm going to get back to your question. I just want to read down these comments and see if there's anything that's relevant before I erase the masterpiece that is behind me. Yeah. You teach music history in your college, right? Yes, I do. I do teach music history. You can record them and post them here as a music history tutorial. I did one on Franz Liszt. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I posted it here on my YouTube channel. I may have posted that only on my Patreon page. So for those of you who don't know, everything up here on YouTube, I post. That's free. I mean, there's some ads, so I get a little bit of pocket change from that. But I also have a Patreon page for people who want to support me financially through that route. And I think I posted a lecture I did on Franz Liszt. So here's this is from Akash, and forgive me if I'm saying the name wrong. But here's my hesitancy. When I put something out that's going to be available to the public, I really want it to be an indicator of my best. And I want to make sure I got as much right as possible. Because, we all know that there's enough, mistaken information out on the internet already. I do not want to add to that inadvertently. So I teach music history, but when I'm going to put something out there where it's going to be out there for everybody, I really want to put in the time to make sure I'm doing it well. So I'm hesitant to just record a lecture and put it up there, especially right now because it's a slightly different setting. I'm not in the classroom like I normally am. I'm doing everything remotely over Zoom. When I first recorded the music theory lectures, I spent a couple days getting my lecture to be as airtight as possible. And I did all these extensive notes. And then when I did the lecture, even then, there's a few times you'll see in the notes where I made a mistake. And so I just want to be really careful. And so I appreciate and I really want to do these music history tutorials because I think it's so exciting. I really think it's a next step for me as in terms of sharing my knowledge of music. I just don't know if I'm going to be able to have the time to do it the justice. And on the one hand, that sounds like I'm selling myself like, oh, I'm not a very good music history teacher. But it's just a very different dynamic for me to record it to a classroom of 15 people who can then ask me questions and we can have this back and forth dialogue. That's a very different experience than for me to record something that then I put out publicly. And I wouldn't want to put it out and not do all the preparation. I've been teaching it for many years, but there's always new discoveries. So I don't want to tell a story about Mozart that people, that everyone thought was true 5 years ago when I developed my lecture, that now the latest history discoveries have shown that that's not a true story. So that's the kind of due diligence I want to do. So that said, I don't want to say no 100%. What I might try to do, like I did with the Liszt lecture, this was maybe a year ago. I did a lecture on Franz Liszt. If there's a lecture that I feel really, really good about, like I think I did all my research and I know that I'm up to date, I'll definitely consider recording it and posting it. So we'll see what happens. That said, at some point, that's definitely one of the big projects on my to-do list, is to really cover all of music history, because there's so much that can be learned for today's music by understanding the history. So I appreciate the request. I'm going to say a mixture of yes and no, and we'll see what happens. We got another comment. This is from Milan. If a song only has a bass line playing single notes accompanying a guitar that also only plays single notes, can we say that the song has a chord progression even though no chords are being played? That's a great question. And Danny, I have not forgotten about yours, but I'm going to keep going. So Milan, the answer is yes. You can say it has a chord progression. Very often, a bass line and a melody will imply a chord sequence. So the word imply is definitely worth paying attention to. Now, there's, I'm going to answer this question, but I'm going to need to erase the board. So for all of you who want to make sure you've seen it, and without me standing in front of it here, if you want to go back and look at it, this is your opportunity. Well, here we go. We're going to erase this, and I'm going to answer Milan's question, and then I'm going to jump to Danny's question about the Barry Harris scale and how that works. So, and this ties into the question about music history and understanding the music history. And when you understand the music history, a lot of things can kind of fall into place and make a lot more sense. So, if you have a bass line, one melody, guitar playing just one note at a time, historically speaking, there was something called polyphony. And polyphony is where you have two or more melodies at the same time. Okay? Polyphony usually didn't imply chords. What they would do between the two melodies is they would just make sure that they controlled that there was consonants on the strong beats or wherever it needed to be, and that whatever dissonance occurred would kind of like fall back into consonants. So you kind of got this kind of loop of consonants to dissonance, back to consonants, dissonance. And the way polyphony in these two melodies would go is that it's really interplay of intervals, consonant and dissonant intervals. Polyphony really develops in the 9th century. So like we're talking about like 1856. Not 1856, 856 I should say. It starts here. It really becomes fully, full blossom during what's called the Renaissance. So we're talking about like 1400s. We really full-blown polyphony in an important way. But by the time we get to 1600, we get something called tonality. And tonality is what we still use today. And tonality is where we have, we really have chords, and the idea of one set of one chord and how it relates to another chord and how it relates to another chord. So today, when you say something like, oh, if I have a bass player playing a single note, guitar players playing a single note, most likely we're talking about a tonal understanding of music. Not necessarily. It could be a polyphonic understanding, in which case it wouldn't imply chords. But since tonality's been around for over 400 years, right? It's probably what we're talking about. And so it'll imply, so if I have, if I have a E, F, G, and this is going, then it goes to B, and then I go G, E, D, D, and then we get C, E, let's say this is what's being played, right? We have so only one note at a time being played by each, but this would imply a C major triad, a G major triad with B in the bass, an A minor triad, and a G major triad. So there would be an implication of chords and a chord progression, even though there's only a guitar playing one note at a time and a bass playing one note at a time. I could flesh out the chords, right? And I could just play. And you could have that little melody there, and you could obviously have other notes going there. So Milan, to answer your question is, the basic answer, can we say that the song has a chord progression even though no chords are being played? Yes, we can. You can imply it, and you can even imply chords with just one instrument. If you go and listen to, this is for Milan, since you asked the question, I'm giving you some homework. Don't get mad at me, I'm a teacher, that's my job. It's my knee-jerk reaction, but I'm gonna give you some homework. I want you to listen to guitarist Christopher Parkening, and I want you to listen to playing anything by Bach. So Christopher Parkening is an amazing classical guitarist, and some of this music, it's all just single notes. Not all of it. Some of it you'll hear chords, but just see, like maybe if you like an arrangement of a Bach cello suite in particular, maybe that would be the best thing to listen to, where you'll have these Bach cello suites where you'll have. Right? And you'll have this type of structure where it's just these arpeggios, but they'll be broken up. And so when you have wide leaps, we were just talking about when we were analyzing the love theme from Cinema Paradiso, how when you have a melody with a wide leap, we expect it to step back in the opposite direction. And the reason that is that if you have wide leaps, in order to make that melody hold together and not sound like these kind of random dots high and low, you need to like make it feel cohesive. So if you have a wide leap, you step back in the opposite direction. That concept is only true if you want it to sound like one melody, if you want to unify it. What Bach would do is he would do these wide leaps, but he wouldn't step back in the opposite direction because he didn't want it to sound like one melody. So he would write for the cello, where it would be like ba-da-da, boom, boom, boom. So you'll have these like kind of high notes, ba-da-da, and then these boom, 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 ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, boom, boom, boom. And the wide leap within the single melody would be implying a top melody and a bottom melody. It's only one instrument playing one note at a time. And I'm not quite sophisticated enough on the piano to improvise Baroque style on the piano, but if it's something like, I'm only playing one note at a time, and that didn't sound very good, so apologies. But that's the idea. A high little melody for like 4 or 5 notes that then jumps down to a low melody for 4 or 5 notes, and then you just jump back and forth. And these wide leaps, it's meant to make it feel like it's two different things. So Bach will write these cello suites where he's playing using just an instrument, playing one note at a time, but he'll make it sound like there's multiple melodies happening. Sometimes even more than 2. So it's almost like each, high range, middle, and low, he'll be writing melodies in all three, and he'll just jump back and forth between all of them. So homework, listen to Christopher Parkening playing a version of a Bach cello suite or something similar to get a sense of how you can have this idea of single notes implying multiple melodies. And in the case of Bach, also implying chords, because Bach is in this time period of 1600 plus, after 1600. So he's one of the first that's really writing in this tonal concept. So great question, great question. All right, Danny, it's your turn. Barry Harris was a jazz pianist. He was playing in the late 1940s and 1950s and lived a very long time, but he was playing with some of the what was called bebop era of jazz. So Barry Harris, the bebop era. So this is late 1940s into the 1950s. And this was jazz. And he ended up in New York City kind of having this kind of workshop where he was really serious about education. And so he would teach like how to play jazz bebop and some of the main concepts behind it. And so he talked about these certain types of scales that he would use, and that all the guys back then, all the jazz musicians back then would use to a certain extent. So, so when Danny asked me the question here, and let me also just make a little bit of an announcement for that. So, Danny is a frequent listener here on these videos, and he and I have actually talked on the phone, and he is set up the Dr. B Music Theory Facebook page. So I don't spend a lot of time on that page just because I'm teaching my college and I'm doing everything, but Danny has done a wonderful job kind of being the moderator and administrator for that Facebook group. And if you want to join, I strongly recommend it. What the idea behind this group is for people like yourself to ask each other questions. Just as in a classroom, I would try to help students say, hey, if you have, I'm going to teach you as much as I can, but if you have questions, you should be talking to each other and helping each other learn more about music theory. And so what's great about this Facebook group is people will pose a question or post something that they've been working on, some sheet music or an audio clip, and they'll ask for feedback. And I think that's the environment that Danny and I are both really hoping continues to grow. And it's a place where we recognize that everyone starts off knowing nothing about music theory, and then we learn from there. So we're very receptive of, like, wherever you are, like if you don't know about scales, and ask a question, we're going to try to direct you to the information that helps you learn your scales. And if you know a lot more and you're a lot more sophisticated, we're going to try to direct you to the resources that help you really understand things about chromatic modulation and diminished 7 common tone chords and the more complicated things. So we try to set up an environment that's really warm, receptive, and is really dedicated to knowledge and getting more knowledge, specifically in the area of music theory. So this is a question from Danny, and I'm always happy to answer his questions. So so he's calling it the 6th diminished scale. And that's actually not a term that I'm familiar with, but I know what scale he's talking about. And what's nice is sometimes when you ask a question, keep in mind that music theory terminology, it's not universal. Some things are universal in music theory and some things are not. And some things change between what country you're in. So when in doubt, use the actual notes. And that's what he did. So he said, okay, so the notes would be C, B, A flat, G, F, E, D, C. So I learned this as bebop major scale, the bebop major scale. Okay, so whatever name you apply it to, just, it's always good to know the different names. But let's talk about, so the question is like, how does this scale work? Why does it work? Where do you use it? And so the main concept here is that rhythmically, this style of music would be primarily eighth notes. So this is a scale that rhythmically you would be expected to play as a series of eighth notes. So let's go ahead and map it out that way. You'll notice I chose to do this scale going down. You can do it up, you can do it down, but there is a reason I did it going down first. And we'll get to that. After that, the next thing is, well, what notes are on the downbeats and what notes are on the upbeats? So if we kind of look and say, well, we've got C, A, G, E, and C. Those are the notes on the downbeat. And this is the critical thing when we're talking about the whole Barry Harris concept, is what notes go on downbeats and what notes go on upbeats. That's a critical part of his whole pedagogy on how to play jazz. And this applies to things other than jazz as well. So it's more universal than that. So you have this scale. I'm sorry. And what that means is that would be your downbeats and everything else would be upbeats. So normally you want your chord tones on the downbeats and non-chord tones on upbeats. That's your basic concept. So a C6 chord, and this is maybe where the 6 comes from. This is probably what he's talking about. So C6. So a C6 chord would be a C major triad with a 6, which is the A. So 1, 3, 5, 6. Now, a little bit of history here. I haven't talked about this a lot in my music theory lectures. When we're talking about 4-note chords, we're usually talking about 7th chords. So I'd much sooner be talking about C, E, G, B. Just in the Cinema Paradiso, we had that E flat major 7, C, E, G, B. And so this sound, however, let's compare this sound, C major 7, to C6. C major 7, C6. Historically, C6 was used in jazz earlier on and much more, and then later in jazz, C major 7 took over. Part of it has to do with the Broadway show tunes that were turned into jazz versions, and so we have the C6 C to A is a very consonant interval, C to B is a dissonant interval. So the idea was that a C6 was more consonant, sounded more like a 1 chord because it was more consonant. And then the melodies being written would often have the tonic in them. So right? So if we think about I've Got Rhythm, which is a George Gershwin piece. So it's G, A, C, D, and this is all in the key of C. D, C, A, G. That A is figured in so prominently, so you get these. And when you... And they'll go, the end of the melody, who could ask for anything tonic? And it ends on Do. So if you're going to end your melody on a C, what's going to be more consonant? Having a B right next to it or having an A right next to it? The answer is to have the A. So when you're writing melodies that you are using, you're wanting to use 4-note chords for the rich harmonies, and you're going to use Do in the melody for a 1 chord, C major 7 is a bit too dissonant often. So C6. So this is kind of the origins and why C6 and C major 7, They're sometimes interchangeable later on in history. But that's where that scale functions. Also keeping in mind that you can't put C and B both on downbeats in an eighth note scale. It's just not possible. You can't do it. To be able to have C on the downbeat means that there must be something between C and B so that B can be on the downbeat. So you can't have this concept of chord tones on downbeats with a C major 7 arpeggio. Can't be done. So the next best thing is the C6. So on major 7 or major 6 chords, you get root, 3, 4, and then you get 6. Okay? So maybe it's a C major 7. And this A flat is a passing tone, right? They're kind of like all, passing tone, passing tone, passing tone, passing tone. They're all passing tones on the upbeat. But that's a chromatic passing tone right there. And you need it, because if you just go up and down the scale, you don't have enough notes. You need 8 notes to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 before you get back to the note you want. If I didn't have this A flat, I wouldn't have enough notes. I'd go C, B, A, G, F now becomes on the downbeat, A, D, and then my C that's on the downbeat at the beginning of my scale would be on the upbeat at the bottom of my scale. So you need to make it an 8-note scale, and the reason you need it to be 8 notes is because you're playing eighth notes. Remember, I started by saying that rhythmic concept is critical. And the idea is so that you have da 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 dum, so it's on the downbeat dum. So you get that C, both octaves fall on downbeats. So what Barry Harris would do is all sorts of portions. You can do all different permutations where you would have. So you might have, start mixing around. The other thing he would do is making sure that you don't always start all your scales on beat 1. Start them on beat 2, start it on beat 3, start it on beat 4. So he had a whole system of how you would use these notes and then place them rhythmically. So kind of like the genius behind what Barry Harris is talking about is that he's not just talking about a scale as a collection of notes, but he's talking about a scale as a collection of notes and a specific rhythm and where it falls within the measure. So that's kind of like the bare bones of what he's talking about. But I want to give you one other thing that he also would talk about. So the bebop major, what I call the bebop major, its counterpart, the bebop dominant. So the bebop dominant scale. So let's say you had a C7. It's a C7 chord, so the notes would be C, E, G, B flat. Can we put all of these notes on a downbeat? Well, C passing tone D to E on the downbeat, that's good. E passing tone F to G on a downbeat, that's good, right? So this looks very similar so far. But now, do we really want A on the downbeat? We don't. Hopefully we can get that B flat. So G, A, B flat on the downbeat, well that's great. And we want C to be on the downbeat. So to do that, the B flat becomes a B natural, and then we put C on the downbeat. So the bebop dominant has a passing tone between the root and the minor seventh. So the chromatic passing tone, I should say. So the chromatic passing tone is that's the chromatic passing tone. And you get on the downbeats, you have your C, your E, your G, and your B flat. Your chord right there is on downbeats. And everything else so I'm just playing some patterns within that scale with the idea, chord tones on downbeats. And sometimes you can change that around, but that's your starting place. So the bebop dominant scale allows you to do that really well on dominant chords. The bebop major allows you to do that on major 7 or major 6 chords very well. And you're just aware of where those notes are falling. So Danny, I hope that answers some questions, gives you some information you did not already know. But that's a great question, and certainly there's all these exercises that Barry Harris would do. So for you, Danny, your homework is to look up some Barry Harris. I remember I was teaching one of my saxophone students about giant steps, and there was a lecture master class with Barry, and there's so much that's been filmed of him. The part where he was talking wasn't like super clear, so sometimes it's hard to find like where's the juicy part where it's like super concise. And I don't necessarily know where those clips are myself. So if you find them, you should post them up in the Facebook group so that other people can sink their teeth into all that good stuff. So great question. Thank you for that, Danny. So let's turn back here to the chat. I'm getting a question from Carl Liban. What are my thoughts on Philip Tagg's everyday tonality? Well, this is where I take out my notepad and I write something down because I don't know enough to really have any thoughts. So one of the reasons I love doing these videos is that people ask me questions, and although I could try to be that teacher who pretends he knows everything, I don't. But I'm willing to learn. So I'm going to jot this down and I'm going to look it up and I'm going to learn a little bit more, and then if you come back in 2 weeks and ask me again, there's a good chance I'll have an answer. But as Elton Wilde will say, maybe I won't. It might take a little bit longer. So feel free to ask me that question. Speaking of which, just as a reminder, I do these every other week, which means that the next one, if all goes according to plan, will be January 30th, 1 p.m. Eastern. So that is a good time for you to check back in and see if I have the answer for you yet. All right. So Gabby's here. Oh, good to see you, Gabby. Gabby's one of the people who supports me on Patreon. She asked me a bunch of questions too. So I have a little folder on my computer of people who've asked me questions, and Gabby asked some questions that I'm hoping to be able to get to in one of these sessions coming up soon. All right. Missy, 1979 is enjoying understanding more about beautiful music. That's right. I love it too. Milos is here. Welcome, Milos. And I'm going to keep scrolling down. So bear with me. Thoughts about Howard Shore? Yeah, Howard Shore is one of those Hollywood film composers who's got a really good reputation, and from everything I've heard, it's deserved. I haven't done a deep dive into Howard Shore, and to be fair, I haven't really spent, the way in which I was educated through a more traditional academic, getting a doctoral degree and stuff. We're studying kind of like the older composers. Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart, Wagner, all of that, and I didn't really get formal training in any of the stuff that I'm starting to talk about now. So what would be interesting for me, I'm just jotting it down, is maybe trying to do an analysis into the different the big Hollywood composers. Like, how interesting would it be to compare Howard Shore, John Williams, and Danny Elfman, let's say. And the different kind of music and the different kind of techniques that they use for the different kinds of films that they're writing for. So I need to dig a little bit deeper into Howard Shore to say anything beyond what I've heard sounds awesome. So I do like his music. Everything I've noticed, I've enjoyed. So talking about some Hollywood golden era movie love themes. Well, there's a lot of great movies out there, especially from the golden age of Hollywood. And it's part of me gets a little nostalgic. So back in like the 1930s and 1940s, your major network television stations, NBC, ABC, CBS, like they had their own orchestra in residence to play and recorded music for their broadcasts. And I think to myself, wow, what a golden age for the orchestral musician, where you would have these jobs where you were just there, ready to go. It was almost like, if we think about music history and kind of people like Franz Joseph Haydn, the great composer of the 18th century, Haydn. He worked at the court. Like back then, it was, you'd have this aristocracy, and the aristocracy, in order to make sure that everyone knew that they were cultured and sophisticated and not just a bunch of brutes, would typically hire the best composer and orchestra they could have. So Haydn would work for Prince Esterhazy, who was a Hungarian prince, and he would have his like castle, and Haydn and an entire orchestra would just be on staff, ready. You know, if there's a party, you got your live music entertainment. And back, if we talk about the golden age of Hollywood, we had some of these, you know, movie studios and these, as well as television studios that have these orchestras. So if you have any specific requests for me to look at, you know, please let me know. But I'll keep my eyes and ears open for good examples that it might be interesting to talk about here. Interactive music history would be absolutely fascinating. Oh yeah. You know, one of the things that's tricky with is how to get that interactive aspect. So there's one aspect. You know, so when I first started my music theory videos on the channel, they weren't interactive for what's being videoed. Meaning, I had a lecture, I said my stuff, I tried to help with visual learning, so I wasn't just talking at people. So I put out charts and drew arrows and things like that. And then after the camera got turned off, people would ask me questions. What I'm trying to do now is get those questions, that interactive thing where there's a dialogue between the people trying to learn something and the person who has a little bit more experience and a little bit more knowledge in that topic area. So I think the idea of interactivity with music history is particularly important, because when you listen to a piece of music from 100 years ago, that's coming from a different culture. That's from a time period. It might be a different culture. It's a different time. Those people felt differently. They thought differently. They had different things that they thought were important in their lives. They had a different philosophy of life. And so when you listen to the music of Mozart, you know, part of the challenge is to try to put yourself in the mindset of the people of that time and understand what they felt. And so you have the conversation and the interactivity with, you listen to something and, well, what are you getting it in, you know, 2021? How does it make you feel in 2021? And how similar was that to how it made someone feel in 1782? How would it have been differently? And there's a lot of really interesting conversations. And one of the extra challenges is that you want to be careful that when you're listening to music, that you allow yourself to have opinions on what you like and dislike. For most people, that's easy. Most people are very good at saying, I don't like that, I like this. But when you start to get into studying music, you're not just willing to just have an opinion on stuff without any knowledge. You want to have an opinion that's based on some kind of knowledge. And so sometimes the pitfall is to go the other way, where you're like listening to all this music and you don't form a personal opinion on whether you like or dislike it. So I think it's important to remember as you study music, especially as if you're in a college, or that you should have opinions. At the same time, you don't want to just have opinions. You also want to have knowledge. So the ideal is have knowledge and then have an opinion based on that knowledge. And it's easy to just have an opinion with no knowledge, and it's also easy to have knowledge with no opinion. It's something I've found amongst, especially the higher you go up in like academic institutions, where people they listen to everything, and everything they find is curious, but they strangely stop having opinions on whether they like it or not. And I think that's an important part of like the interactive discussion that can be involved with music history. So yeah, there's a lot. This is Sam was making a comment on this. So yeah, you're right, Sam. There's a lot of interesting things that can happen with that interactive music history conversation. Got another question here. Can you share some light on Rachmaninoff piano techniques and the kind of style and progression he uses in his pieces? Okay, so that's going to be a bigger question than I'm really able to answer right this minute. And what's nice, and just so you know, this is from Karthik. Karthik, you're not the first person to ask me about Rachmaninoff. So the way it works is the more people who ask me about something, that means the more people who are going to really appreciate and get a lot out of when I say something. So what I'm going to propose is that probably I should put Rachmaninoff on my list of people to do a little preparation. I'll give you a teaser. I love Rachmaninoff. I think his second piano concerto is deservedly one of the greatest pieces of greatest piano concertos in the world and history. His orchestral variations, Rhapsody on a Theme by Paganini. Paganini was a virtuoso violinist, and Rachmaninoff wrote a set of variations for orchestra based on a melody that this violin virtuoso had played and composed. That's another piece that deserves all the accolades it gets. So Rachmaninoff is a fantastic composer. He's the person, when we talk about music having a climax and a high point, he was the epitome of that idea. So if we're going to talk about techniques, and I'll give you a little bit, this is not necessarily unique to the piano, but it's more unique to the compositional style of Rachmaninoff. And he wrote that he used this both for his own compositions and for when he performed the music of other composers. So he was a performer. He wasn't just a composer. He was a virtuoso pianist. And he said that for every piece of music, he would look for the one single point that was the climax of that piece. And he would try to make sure that everything kind of led up to that climax and then kind of wrapped up from that climax. And he recognized that there might be some peaks and valleys on the way up and on the way down, but it still was critical to know, as both a composer and a performer, where was that one high point. And then he would break it down. Each section would have its own high point, and each phrase would have its high point. And the result of that technique and the way of thinking meant that Rachmaninoff's music always feels like it's going somewhere. There's a striving, there's a direction, there's a goal. There's this feeling of something inevitable, an unfolding and a revealing that is unique to the music, that has that mindset. So that's certainly one of Rachmaninoff's compositional techniques. He's also using essentially tonal harmony, so all these kind of traditional chord progressions that I've talked about in all my videos. He's using that 85% of the time. But then there's that 15% where he's using some unique things. He's using a lot of seventh chords, ninth chords, larger structures that are very pretty. He's using harmonies that you would hear in jazz, but it's not rhythmically in a jazz style. It's in a European classical style, and it's beautiful. The music of Rachmaninoff has definitely been absorbed and studied by Howard Shore and John Williams and the Hollywood film composers. So Rachmaninoff is a huge influence on the sound of Hollywood music. So a huge debt is owed to him. And Rachmaninoff kind of got maybe, early on did not get his fair shake in music history. He came in, he was really prominent at the early part of the 20th century. And at that time, the critics, the kind of intellectual elite, were all really intrigued with people like Arnold Schoenberg and the more dissonant avant-garde techniques being explored. And they thought Rachmaninoff was kind of like that old 19th century sentimental romantic style. And they kind of like poo-pooed it, and they didn't really give him the credit that he deserved right off the bat. I mean, he was certainly well received and popular. But in terms of critical academic circles, I don't think he got everything he deserved. He was kind of like minimized because he was continuing a tradition as opposed to coming up with something that was radically different. So I would be happy to do a little research into Rachmaninoff and talk about kind of the chord progressions that he uses. You know, the top pieces that I'm going to there's different spellings of his name depending on what language you're looking at. He wrote a vocalise. That's beautiful. That might be a good place to start in terms of a beautiful melody with some beautiful harmonies to examine what kind of progressions Rachmaninoff is using. And you know, the majority of it is what we've talked about already. And then what's the 15% that's unique, that's uniquely his style, and how does he use those kind of non-chord tones? Because very often it's the way that you use non-chord tones. It's almost like your basic harmony is your building blocks, but how you put them together with the non-chord tones is what makes Rachmaninoff sound different than Franz Liszt, sound different than Beethoven. So that's a great question, and I'll be happy to kind of come back to that and put that on my to-do list. Milan, you're very much welcome. All right, and Milan promises to do the homework. That's the kind of student I like. Elton is writing, thank you for talking about the Cinema Paradiso. Yeah, there is so much emotion in that melody, and I think, yeah, and you're absolutely right that learning the strategies of the great composers is a great way to learn how to compose. It's very interesting to me that how music education has changed over the centuries. And if we go back, so I have, do I have it here on my, I don't think I have it right here. So going back hundreds of years, there's a book called Gradus ad Parnassum by Fuchs. Let me spell that so you don't think I'm cursing. I'm not sure if I'm spelling it perfectly correct. But this is where this is a book that talks about species counterpoint. And I have a couple of videos up on species counterpoint that you can look up. But I don't go anywhere as in depth as what Fuchs does in this book. And what's really interesting in this book is it's a dialogue. It's not a book like a textbook like we understand them today. It's like the ancient Greeks would do, where you'd have these dialogues. So if you've studied your ancient Greek philosophy, you have like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and they'd have these dialogues, which basically was like the written version. It's like listening to a podcast, two people talk about a subject. It's the same, it's the predecessor of that. So you'd have like, you know, dialogue between Plato and Aristotle, like, what about this? And then the counter argument, and it would go back and forth, and they would argue their different points in a dialogue format. And that's essentially what the Fuchs is, and it's the dialogue between the master teacher and the student. And it's in this dialogue of a student asking a question and the master answering it. So when we just had the comment here just earlier, a couple minutes ago, about the interactive idea of talking about music history, this is very much this idea, these ideas of a dialogue where you have someone asking a question and someone giving an answer. And it's actually really, I mean, I started laughing. I was reading, not all the translations maintain this format, but when I first read it, I was just laughing because the student would be saying things like, "Most honorable master, please impart to me the wisdom about how to write species counterpoint when the consonant should resolve." And I was thinking to myself, oh man, if I could just get my students to talk to me like that, it would crack me up and make my day so entertaining. And then the master would be like, if you study hard, you know, you too will be able to. It's just a really, it's definitely very different from the textbooks that we use today, which are more like an instructional manual. And so I think that, you know, we when we're looking at how to learn how to compose, looking back, we know of all these stories where Johann Sebastian Bach would get the sheet music of Antonin Vivaldi, So he would study the music. Bach didn't read a textbook, right? He didn't watch Dr. B music theory videos on YouTube. He got the sheet music of an awesome composer who was just started out a little bit before him, right? So Vivaldi was a little bit earlier than Bach. And he would then study that music, he would study it, and then he would make arrangements of that music for different groups of instruments. So Vivaldi might have an orchestral piece, and Bach would be like, how do I write that for, 4 recorders, or 4 flutes, or 4 harpsichord? And so he would do arrangements of these great composers. So, I think one of the pitfalls today that you all have to be careful of is getting a music theory textbook is great. But the emphasis there is very much on the theory and these little excerpts of actual music. And sometimes you don't want to miss out on getting an entire piece of music and really looking at it. So Elton, when you say that that you think, Elton says, I think by learning the strategies of the great composers is a great way to learn how to compose. You are 100% right. And it's really easy to just read a textbook and kind of understand things in this kind of theoretical standpoint, but you have to be able to apply the theory to practice. You got to connect the two. And I think that's by studying the great composers, and I'm including great film composers in that. I'm not an elitist where it's only got to be Beethoven and Mozart and Donizetti. There's great composers in every style of music. Well, hello, and you're welcome to everyone who's writing that. And very good. We got people thanking Elton for suggesting Cinema Paradiso. And you're welcome. I'm happy to analyze it. First time hearing it? Oh yeah, this is from Pritam. Pritam, you're in for a treat. I've been listening to the soundtrack, as I'm kind of doing some chores around the house. And I haven't watched the movie in a while. I'm really feeling inspired to watch the movie again because I remember it's just it's like one of those movies that's it's emotional. It'll probably make you cry and it'll probably make you feel great at the same time. It's one of those kind of movies. So enjoy. Let me know if you agree with me. All right, Neerus, my pleasure. My pleasure. Glad you were able to catch one of the streams live. Here's a question regarding secondary 2-5-1s. The most beautiful of them for me is a 2-5 going to the 4 chord, T going to te on the secondary 2 and 5, and then resolving to la is just so satisfying. Is it just tonicization or a momentary mixolydian flavor? So that's a great question. So let's put this up on the board so that everyone can follow what we're talking about. Because everything is fine. Just my little shelf that holds all my markers just fell down, but that is not a problem. All right. So I think one of the things that's important, and remember I said earlier today that it's important to be knowledgeable and have an opinion. So I think it's important to know all about all the different secondary functions and secondary 2-5-1s. But what Nereus, I guess it's Nereus, what Nereus is saying is that their favorite is 2-5-1, 2-5 to the 4. It's important to have your favorites. It's what makes you you. What makes your style your style. It's what's going to make Rachmaninoff, Howard Shore. To know everything, but there's certain ones that are your favorites, and you're going to use them, and you're going to give them certain emphasis. So let's say we're in the key of C major, and we're going to do a secondary 2-5. So we're going to go to our 4 chord, but we're going to do a 2 of 4 and a 5 of 4. So this is called a secondary function. For those of you who don't know what that means, when this is all done, go look at those videos where we talk about secondary functions. They're awesome. They're really exciting. They're very expressive. So let's put some lead sheet symbols up. So this means that our 4 chord is an F major triad. This means that we got a C major triad, is our 5 of 4. Our 2 of 4 would be a G minor triad. And when you're talking about the T going to te, I'm assuming you're going to want to keep that, make that a 5-7. So we're going to make that a C7, right? So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. This is our solfege. Depending on certain European countries, we'll use something called fixed do, where do is always C, C. Other countries will use movable do, where movable do is always 1 in whatever key you're in. Since we're in C, this could be movable do and fixed do. It'll be the same. So this way I can please everybody, right? So that would mean do is C, re is D, mi is E, fa is F, so is G, la is A, T is B. So Nereus is saying, loves to hear T, which is the B natural, right? This B natural is a pitch, going in the G minor to the B flat. That's in that. And that B flat is eventually going to go and resolve down to an A. And yes, that kind of stepwise motion, especially chromatically, is so satisfying. C major, 1, 4, 5, 1. Now what happens if we go 1, 4, 5? So now we're going 1, 4, 5, 2 of 4, 5, 7 of 4, 4. Now that's pretty abrupt, right? Because we're taking the G, I'm taking a G major triad and converting it to a G minor triad, C7, like that. There's other ways we can get into that, right? If we think our B, it could be part of it could be part of a 3 chord, but that's probably the way that most composers would move. That's pretty spooky, right? Check that out. So I think the most common way a composer would get into this would be to make it a 5 chord here, 2, 5 to 4, or to just use it as a non-chord tone, so that functionally, because 5 does not normally go to 4, so there might be another way to get into that. But what I just played there is, what if we went 1, and we're in the key of C major, we went 1, 3, and then we did our 2 of 4, 5, 7, 4, right? So, because 1, 3, 4 is a very common progression. So if I go, that's a very common chord progression. And usually when you're talking about secondary functions are inserted in between the foundational harmonic progression. But check out, because of the way the bass will move, it's going to be kind of spooky. It would be great for like Batman movie or something. C major triad, E minor triad, and that moving to that G minor is like shocking. And then the ears start, as soon as you do that, you're like, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. And then you're like, ah, right? So the shock, this is the shock right here. We're introducing a chromatic note with an unusual root movement progression. But yeah, getting that T to te to la in terms of how it's functioning within the key. B, and te is what they call, like when you do a B flat, they call it te, T-E. This would be your B flat. So you have these kind of chromatic alterations for the solfege. So yeah, I agree with you. 2-5 going to 4, it's good stuff. Now your question is it just tonicization or a momentary mixolydian flavor? So the idea of mixolydian is that C would be this. So mixolydian would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, B flat. So mixolydian is a mode of the major scale. It's the 5th mode. and it has the root as a major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, and a minor seven. Okay, so it kind of shifts as if we're in F major for a second, right? When you put that B flat, so it's not going to really sound. You know, I think it sounds like, it depends how you're going to do it. So nearest, the question is, how do you do it? The way I did it, it sounds like a tonicization. And tonicization means where you do a cadence in a new key, and it's kind of like a brief cadence in a new key. This sounds like a brief cadence in a new key to me. Mixolydian, the idea of a modal flavor, it doesn't sound like that because 2-5-1 is this is like 2-5-1, right? Is such a tonal concept that it's kind of antithetical to a modal concept. So as soon as you do something like this, that's super tonal, it sounds like a tonicization. To make it feel like a modal shift, Mixolydian, you would need to like if you were to just go 1, 4, minor 5, 1, right? So that would sound like Mixolydian, a shift into Mixolydian, because it's still sounding like C is your focal point. For it to sound like Mixolydian, it must sound like C is still your tonal center. That's really what it is. To get something to sound modal, there has to be a tonal center. So right here, the F sounds like the tonal center. 2-5-1 in F. So that's why it doesn't sound like modal. It sounds like a tonicization. You'd have to not have a progression that's so clearly in F that uses the B flat, but it still sounds like C is your do for it to sound like make it sound Mixolydian. Let me say that one more time because I'm not sure I said it as clearly as I could. For something to sound Mixolydian, which is a mode, it means that your original tonic, in this case do is being C, that's still the tonal focus, and that all the chord progressions still, like in terms of their bass movement, still go there. So when I talk about that, I'm really talking about, so it still sounds 1, 4, 5, 1, and instead of going, that's not going to sound Mixolydian, that's going to sound like major Ionian. Now when I use the G minor triad that has that B flat, now it sounds Mixolydian. So I think that's a good way to explain it for your question. All right, another question. How do you use the whole tone in improvisation? Ooh, good question. Whole tone scale, and I'm sure that's what we're talking about here, the whole tone scale. Let me tell you, there's a number of ways you can use it, but let me give you the most common way. It's most commonly used on a dominant sonority. Let's keep ourselves in C major so that we can. So a dominant sonority would be a G7. Let me write this differently. So 5/7, which would be a G7. So whenever you have a dominant sonority, that's your tension that's going to resolve to your 1 chord. And the concept is you can increase the tension and the dissonance of the 5 chord because you're going to resolve it right away. So one of the ways that you can increase the tension is you can make it a 5, 7, 5 augmented, like a 5 augmented 7, right? So it would be like a G7 sharp 5. On that kind of chord, on that 5 chord, you could play G, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, F, G. Now check it out, whole tone scale. G to A is a whole step, A to B is a whole step, B to C sharp is a whole step, C sharp to D sharp is a whole step. Now D sharp to F, that's a third because D, E, F, right? But this is where we use our enharmonic spellings. D sharp, we can also call that enharmonically E flat. And E flat to F is a whole step. F to G is a whole step. So we have to use that enharmonic spelling, but the whole tone scale is a scale that's only whole steps. So unlike your major scale, which is a mixture of whole steps and half steps, and minor scales are a different mixture of whole steps and half steps, this is your whole tone scale. All whole tones, you only get 6 different notes. G, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, F. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's not a 7-note scale like your major scales. It's a 6-note scale. It sounds like this. Now, in terms of its feeling, it feels magical, it feels airy, it feels light, it feels like it's going up. So typically, your Hollywood composers, your film composers, is when someone falls asleep and starts to dream, you use the whole tone scale. So emotionally, you can kind of think about that idea. And in terms of improvisation, if we're having something where we're going, I'm sorry, let me do it again. So let me slow it down to the harmonic progression. I'm going to use the whole tone scale. I'm doing 1, 6, 2, 5 is the chord progression. So. Right? So that was me using the whole tone scale on the G7 on the 5/7 chord. So I was going C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7 sharp 5. And to use the whole tone scale right there, it kind of gives it this like expanding feeling. Like think about the word augmented, right? You got your augmented triad, augmented, make it bigger. Whoop, things are growing. It has that kind of feeling to it. So that's a great way for you to start playing around with the whole tone scale. We got Jackie Borgen saying, I just came across you recently. You helped me understand music theory and possibly go towards my master's. Yes! More education. That's excellent. I'm glad I can help. Got greetings from South Africa. Well, right back at you. We actually have a new person in charge of public relations at one of the colleges I work at who's from South Africa. And so I was just chatting with her. So good stuff, good stuff. I'm getting some suggestions here. Okay, I'm getting some suggestions. Okay, Missy 1979, I'm taking a screenshot of this spot right here. So I got a list of these things. We got Ben Hur suggestion, El Cid. Alrighty, awesome. I'm gonna take a picture of that so I can maybe give a little thoughts into that. All right. Hey, Andrew Norris, thank you very much. Good to have you joining us. For those of you who don't know, Andrew Norris was the winner of the first ever Dr. B Music Theory jingle writing contest. So if you go on my YouTube channel, you might see my jingle that I had a contest, and Andrew submitted what I thought was a real fun jingle that I use sometimes when I'm going to remind people about when I'm having my next YouTube live video series. So Andrew, good to have you join me. We got another question. This is from Brandon. Brandon's asking, what compositional techniques is best to learn from Stravinsky's Rite of Spring? Woo! Boy. So first off, the Rite of Spring, that's an epic piece of music that had so many new and innovative techniques along with a thorough understanding of the tradition. So I'm just moving here and I'm going to grab my, yes, here it is. just so that you know I'm serious. Like I don't have all my materials set up, but right here is my copy of the score, Igor Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring. And you know I've studied this one. I've followed along with the recording. I've listened. I've tried to understand what's going on here. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about what I took away as being the most important concept. So I was doing my undergraduate work and I was writing music for jazz big band. And I was trying to use Stravinsky techniques in a jazz big band setting. And my idea was that, so my initial understanding was that the traditional way of writing for a jazz big band is you have your saxophone section, you have your brass section, and so your sax section is like 2 alto saxophones, 2 tenor, 1 bari. Your brass section is usually 3 to 4 trumpets and 3 to 4 trombones. And then you have your rhythm section. So you have your sax section, brass section, and your rhythm section. And your rhythm section in a big band, this marker is starting to die. Let's see if I can find one of my newer markers. Would be guitar, piano, bass, and drums. And so my understanding of this time is that Stravinsky would put, like, let's say you had a C7 sharp 9, that you wouldn't necessarily. So let me back up. I'm not saying this well. Usually, if you had a C7 sharp 9, you'd put the entire chord in the sax section or close to it, right? Entire chord here. You'd put the entire chord here and the entire chord here. So you'd put the entire chord in each section. So it would just be, you would be doubling things between the different timbres. So C7 sharp 9, if you have 5 instruments, that means the bari might play a C, tenor might play B flat, an E, alto might play would play a D sharp, and then you might double a note, or you might put another upper structure, like perhaps you might also put a sharp 11 in there maybe as well. So you do something like this, and then you have the trumpets and trombones. You'd have a C in one of the trombones. You'd have a B flat. You'd have like your core notes, which would be the C, B flat, E, D sharp, and you'd have those in each section. And that's the traditional way of writing for a jazz band. But I looked at Stravinsky and I noticed that he did not always put the entire chord within a singular section. He kind of would distribute it between different sections. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have the bass playing the rhythm section and the piano, they're all going to play the C. I'm going to have the brass playing this B flat E, and then I'm going to have the saxophones just playing the color, like some D sharps and some F sharps. So I'm going to take that whole chord and I'm going to spread it out amongst different timbral instruments. And my instructor was like, that's not the way it's done. That's not what Stravinsky does. Or no, he didn't say that's not what Stravinsky. He said no composer does that. So I said, I tend to be, even when I was young, I tended to not always take people's, I need to be proven. I like proof, right? So I went and I got Stravinsky and I started studying it. I studied the whole score, and I discovered we were both kind of right. So what Stravinsky would do is he wasn't writing for jazz big band, but he would have his woodwinds, he'd have his brass, and he'd have his string section. And what he would do is he would choose one section, and it wasn't always the same one, and he'd have the complete chord in one section, and then he'd have pieces of it in the other 2 sections. So I was mistaken saying that you would have the pieces in no section would have the complete chord. I was wrong. And he was wrong saying that every section had to have the complete chord. at least in terms of how Stravinsky solved this problem, right? So Stravinsky would have one section, one timbral group of instruments that had the whole complete chord. And the reason why when I keep using the word timbre is that when you have a chord, for it to feel cohesive and go together, having a similar sound, woodwinds blend together, that's what glues it together and gives its cohesiveness. So what I was doing made it sound a little bit like pointillistic and a little like it didn't come together, it didn't glue together, because it was all different notes in different sections, and there was no timbral cohesion in anything. But he was a little bit too traditional. And again, we're talking Stravinsky, Rite of Spring. This is 1913. Like, I'm not that old, right? This has been around long before me. So he was mistaken too. And so I modified my piece so that I would like put the complete chord in the brass section, but I wouldn't in the saxophone section. And what that did is it gave my writing a more modern, unique flavor in terms of the orchestration. And so one of the things that Stravinsky was known for was this unique orchestration. Even when he used the same chords as everybody else, they sounded different because the way he orchestrated them. And that was one of the critical things. He would not put the complete entire chord in every section. He would put it in one. So it might be the strings have the complete chord, and then the woodwinds and brass are little points of color. Or he'd put the complete chord in the woodwinds, and then the strings would be color. And he'd play with all these different colors. And again, in musicians, we often use the word colors to talk about the different sounds of the different instruments. So, so that's the one that I found the most interesting to learn from Stravinsky. Other things that I think are very, very valuable to learn from Stravinsky. So this orchestrational technique was the most valuable for me to learn and to look at it. Then there's the kind of like the very, very famous polychord structure that Stravinsky uses early on, where he has an E flat 7 chord voiced like this. So it's actually like a E flat 7 with G in the bass, but that's all over an E major triad in root position. So you'll get, and then you'll get, right? So E major triad sounds perfectly normal. E flat 7, first inversion, perfectly normal. Put the two together. That's super, super, super dissonant. Right? And so this kind of polychord idea, and he uses it as kind of this primitive dance, the beginning. So it's like this, it's a repeated chord with these unexpected accents. So it's like this pulsating chord with unexpected accents, so there's not a clear meter. And that kind of idea of so there's a whole bunch of things just in that are super worth being aware of as a compositional technique. So shifting accents, which kind of can lead into changing meter. So instead of just having everything in 4/4 or 3/4, where you have these repeated metric structures, you have a pulse but unexpected non-metric structures. So changing meters is going to be really like that. So let's imagine we're going something like this: 1 2 3 4 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 1 2 3 4 1. Right? He in this case, I don't think he really wrote it as changing meter. He wrote it as shifting accents. So he'd write it in 4/4, but it doesn't sound like it's in 4/4 because the accents don't line up. So there's that concept of shifting accents and changing meter that are very evident in this section. And then there's this idea of this kind of polychord, which one has to remember that you know, the level, like dissonance, you can have a lot of dissonance, but at some point it has to be comprehensible. And not all dissonance used in any way you want is comprehensible. Sometimes you can set up dissonance and you can set it up in a way where it does not make sense to a human being, right? So you have to be careful. And so this was his way of like really stretching the levels of dissonance, and the repetition And the rhythmic quality is one of the ways that kind of made it make more sense, because you're like, it's not like it was like that chord. It wasn't like he used this as then tried to make a chord regression to an equally dissonant chord, moving to an equally dissonant chord. He didn't do that. He just kept repeating it over and over and over. So it became this kind of like, it was supposed to meant to be evocative of a primitive dance. So those are some of the techniques that I would take from Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Alrighty. Yeah, I've got a question on counterpoint. Counterpoint is such a big subject. This is a question coming from Bahram. So Bahram, check out some of my earlier videos. I talk about species counterpoint. I think those might be a good start. And then we'll see about, if you still have questions after that, after you've watched the counterpoint videos. And I have maybe 2 or 3 of them. If you still have questions, follow up, because there's obviously, you can always go deeper, and then I'd be happy to go deeper for you. Artusi's treatise, yeah, there's all these, treatises start like that, pattern after Plato's Republic. Yeah, you're talking about the dialogue thing. Yeah, Artusi's, so they didn't have textbooks. They called a lot of things a treatise. So that it was just a different way of communication that was, has certain pros and cons. Boleros, thank you. Boleros is talking about how they have, saying, I have many books of harmony and counterpoint, but it's always better to hear it explained and talked about. I think there's a reason why long-form podcasts are becoming more and more popular today. I mean, if you compare to like 5 years ago, and this is what I'm doing here is kind of very much up that alley, but it's essentially a long-form podcast. So I'm not innovative in this sense, but there's something unique to be gained by spending a lot of time on a topic. If I'm going to be critical, sometimes when I listen to the news, one of my criticisms is that I'll get they'll maybe spend a minute or 2 minutes on a story, and by the time I get done listening to that minute or 2 minutes, I have twice as many questions as I did when they started. I have all these follow-up questions I want to ask, and they usually don't get to them. And so the normal, there's that kind of like the traditional format has certain deficiencies. There's certain advantages. I'm not knocking it, but there are certain deficiencies. So I'm glad to be able to provide something that's beyond a textbook type of thing, where we're actually to talk about it. And I'm doing this off the cuff. So you're getting to see also the how my mind kind of goes through things, and sometimes I get a little hung up, and my mouth gets ahead of my brain, or vice versa. But I think there's certain value in kind of seeing the sequence of the thoughts in real time. So I'm glad that you're enjoying that. All right, I just saw someone mention the word the composer Gesualdo, one of my favorites. I just want to compose like Gesualdo. Yeah, baby. Gesualdo. I remember being really young and checking out Moro Lasso al mio Diolo, which is a madrigal. This is 16th century. This guy was a prince. Everyone thought he was crazy. There's a story about how he found his wife with a lover and murdered both of them by throwing them out the castle window. I don't know how much of that's true, but he wrote some really, really, I don't know if I'm spelling it correctly, and I know he wasn't thinking of it like this, but it starts with a D flat major triad to an A minor triad in first inversion to a B major triad to, I think, a G major triad with B in the bass. And when I heard this, I was like, what is that? You don't hear this kind of stuff until late 19th century. He's doing this in not 17. He's doing this in 16, I don't know, no, more like 1580s, I think. 1580s. I'm not 100% sure. This is one of the reasons I don't want to do all music history without doing a little bit more research. I'd have to jot this down to make sure I got it right. But he's doing it like here, and you don't hear it again until like 1880s, right? So it's like 300 years ahead of his time. Like, oh my goodness, right? You don't. That's unique to be like harmonically 300, doing sounds that aren't heard for another 300 years. No wonder they thought he was insane, and maybe he was, but who knows? But yeah, being able to write music like Gesualdo is something. What I did is I love that music too. As I would just get some of his madrigals and start trying to play them on the piano, and then try to sing the different parts. And nowadays, what's awesome is it's so easy. Like you can sing the bass part, then overdub it, record the tenor part, record it. Like if you were to just record all yourself singing all the different parts, by the time you were done with that process, and it might take a while, right? You don't have to sing it beautifully. You just got to get the right pitches. What you would learn by doing that recording in terms of your ear and your understanding of counterpoint, you would make a light year jump forward in your own compositional techniques if you were to do that. So that's my tip for you. Pick your favorite Gesualdo madrigal. You don't even have to record the whole thing. Don't make it too crazy. Just record 2 phrases, 8 measures, 16 measures, however long that is. Record yourself, overdub all the parts, do that, and then start like that alone will be a major step forward in terms of how to write. So when you got this poetry that you want to set to music, you're going to have a real thorough understanding of how it's done. And these madrigals, including like people like the English madrigal composers, so like Thomas Wilkes, Thomas Morley, just to follow that, another one of my favorites that I've analyzed in one of my videos, Luca Marenzio. These English composers writing Italian madrigals and Italian composers writing Italian madrigals, totally worth studying. And realize that you're dealing with 2 art forms and you're figuring out how to get them to come together. You're dealing with poetry, you're dealing with music, and the marriage between those two so you're really learning 2 things, and then you're learning 3 things. You're learning poetry, music, and then the art of combining them. So good luck. That sounds really exciting. Yeah. So Jervy, I forget which one I do, but I do talk about Luca Marenzio in one of my earlier videos and analyze that. But I'm going to jot down here Renaissance as well. And if I have an opportunity to do another video that's really delving deep into some Renaissance music and the unique counterpoint of that Renaissance time period, I will do so because that's an era that I really enjoy. It's funny, when I started off, so I grew up and my dad used to play classical music in the house, and I heard it growing up, and I didn't like it. I was a kid. It wasn't, it's old music that my dad listened to. I didn't like it. But when I started listening to the music, I really liked, right off the bat, I liked Stravinsky, and then I liked like Marchot, like medieval music, like from the Middle Ages, like 14th century, and then early 20th century. And like Mozart's in the middle, and I was like, I don't like Mozart. Mozart, yuck, right? And then as I kept listening to more and more music, my interest started to go in terms of timeline. So I started liking the Renaissance music, and I liked the Romantic music, and then I moved up to the Baroque and to the early Romantic. And Mozart and Haydn were the last of the classical composers that I started to really enjoy. So that's kind of like my evolution of listening to music. I started off at those kind of the Middle Ages, where it started was like dense polyphony, like Marchot, people like that, and Stravinsky, and then I kind of worked my way in. And certainly I've expanded to listening to composers that are going in this direction as well, right? As well as some music that goes in this direction. There's not a lot pre-Middle Ages that I particularly enjoy. I don't love listening to Gregorian chant. I respect it. I find it interesting, but it does not emotionally resonate with me in the same way as some other music does. But it's just like, so that kind of traditional stuff that my dad listened to was the last stuff that I got into. But that Renaissance music is certainly something special. All right. Amit is asking, are there only 2 whole tone scales? Yes, that is correct. It's because as soon as you get done with the 2, they're just permutations. They're just like a mode of the same scale. So you're absolutely right. You only got to learn 2. Like, you got to be able to start on any note of the scale, right? So if you're going C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, B flat, right? You got to be able to start on any note and make it sound like that's your starting note, your do, right? But then D flat, E flat, F, G, A, B, right? And so then you have another whole tone scale. Then the D, like your D whole tone scale, has the same notes as your C whole tone scale, has your same notes as your E whole tone scale. So you only really have 2 different patterns, let's put it that way. So if you're thinking about playing it on the piano or playing it on the guitar or playing it on the saxophone, there's only 2 different patterns you need to know, but intellectually you need to be able to start on any one of those notes. Good question. We're going to be I'm going to be wrapping things up here fairly shortly, so I know I'm not going to get to everybody's question today. But you know, you can always come back on January 30th and we can talk some more. Herman's Vertigo, one of favorite soundtracks. Yeah. Vertigo is it's a classic movie too. And so Entity Identity is asking, will this video be available after the stream? The answer is absolutely yes. Every live video I do, I keep up archived on my YouTube channel. By the way, a big thank you to all of you. I just recently broke 15,000 subscribers, which I was like, woohoo, awesome. I'm no Joe Rogan. Spotify is not going to buy me out yet. But you know, I'm on my way. I'm building an audience, and I really appreciate all of you, and I appreciate your suggestions because, you know, I want to keep providing value to you all. One of the things I think about in the morning when I wake up, I try to meditate a little bit, just get my mind like, what are my goals? And one of the things I think about is, how can I add value and goodness into the world? What can I give to the world that the world wants? You know, so if the world wants more Rachmaninoff and more information on things like that, I'm able to do it. That's kind of one of my goals. So I'm happy to be involved with all that. So yeah. Oh, good. Glad you liked that. Something on Stravinsky. Pranav, welcome Pranav. Pranav is saying he just completed a composition for a quintet, working on it for about a month, and will be sharing it on the Facebook group soon. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I was just mentioning that. So Pranav's a great example of someone who's working on a quintet, posted up on the Facebook group, and there's so many ways that you can give him feedback, right? So at whatever level of music theory you are at, like at the very first level, you can say, well, what did you like about it, right? You listen to it and just let him know what he liked. Like, it's really important for a composer to know what resonates with people, what really lands. Like, you know, everything could be fine, it can all be theoretically correct, but what really grabs someone? What section does someone say, oh, that's the section that really makes me excited? So letting someone know what you like. And if you have things of like, you know, the other part is like, did you think about, you know, suggestions, right? We're not going to say, Pranav, that piece sucked. Give it up. You're a hack. This is not the Facebook group we're running, right? We're trying to be helpful, right? And then you can also note certain music theory elements. So if you're like, if you notice parallel octaves, let's say, the question then would be, and this is the question I ask my students, so you have parallel octaves. Was that intentional? What was the effect you were trying to achieve? Did you break one of the rules on purpose, and for what reason? So it's the beginning of a dialogue. Because breaking the rules, because that's almost the wrong way to think it, doing something unexpected is not always bad. Sometimes it is. Like if you unexpectedly run in front of a car, that's probably going to be a bad thing. If you unexpectedly surprise someone with a birthday cake, that's be a good thing, right? So the same thing is true in music. Some of these unexpected things are going to be good. So if something is done unexpectedly, you'll note that music theory thing and you'll ask a question. Was that on purpose? So I'm excited to see what Pranav has been working on, and hopefully some of us can give him some feedback. So Gesualdo is how you spell it. And if you just type in Moro Lasso, that's the beginning of the name of the madrigal, and you can kind of see it. So Gesualdo is Gesualdo. He's an Italian composer. And if you Google that, I'm sure it's going to pop there. So, and Michael put it in there, so that's awesome. I appreciate. Yeah, feel free to use this comment section to answer each other's questions. I do not need to have a monopoly on answering questions. You're happy to. I'm happy to have people help out. So I think this will be my last question that I take. So Amit, you get the. Let's see if you have a good one here. 2 flat 6 flat 9 to 1 major 7. Why does 2 flat 6 flat 9? Okay. Let me see if I'm not quite sure. So 2 flat 6 flat 9 to 1 major 7. It would be helpful if I had actual pitches, but let me see if I can. So DFA would be your 2, flat 6 would be B flat, flat 9 would be E flat, 1 major 7, C, E, G, B. Are we really talking about a chord? 2 flat 6 flat 9? Put that in the chat. Is that really what we're talking about? That's not super common. So maybe it's just the way you have to write it here on using text. It looks a little funny. So maybe you can explain what you mean by that. Certainly, voice leading is one of the things that makes things work well, right? So smooth voice leading is such a critical aspect, and so you can take dissonances, and as long as you can resolve stuff by step, so when I see E flat, which would be your flat 9, that goes to an E, B flat goes to a B, your A can go either probably to the G, the F can also go to the E, the D can go down to the C. You got a lot of things that can kind of. Now that's parallel everything, so that's probably not what most composers would do, but they might move in opposite direction. So probably not flat 9. Okay, just meant 9. Yeah. Okay. So it would be an E. So we're talking. So 5 and flat 6 is not. That's pretty crunchy. That's pretty crunchy stuff. You know what you should do, Amit? You should send me a picture, like I don't, whether it's on Facebook or whatever, maybe post it in the Facebook group. Take a picture of an example of what you're talking about so I can see in like actual music how they use it. That's with a natural 6. That's with a flat 6. Smooth voice leading. Smooth voice leading is it. But if you want a little bit more, you could post a picture up in the Facebook group, and we can kind of use that as a foundation for a great conversation. So everyone, the last thing I wanted to mention to you all is more just to kind of keep you all informed. I know that one of the main values of the YouTube channel is that it's free, right? And I know that it's free and it's convenient, and that's very important. I like to keep it that way. But for those of you who got some money and want to get involved, I'm teaching Music Theory 2, and I've mentioned this before. I teach at something called the Dutchess Community College Academy of Music. Community College Academy of Music. It actually starts next week, January 20th, and it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And I teach, we use the videos that you guys already know, but we do homework, and there's an opportunity to answer questions on specific exercises that I assign. So if this is a time slot that's available for you, if this is would not be a financial burden, you can certainly join me in a class. Now you can do, this would not be for college credit. You can do it for college credit. It would cost a little bit more. But if you don't want to do it for college credit, you can do that, and it's for 16 weeks. So you definitely get your money's worth in terms of time, and you get to go through assigned exercises and homework. So I just wanted to let you all know about that because it's starting soon. And if this is not the right time and you're really more Music Theory 1, I do that in the fall semester, usually starting the end of August. So you can always kind of keep your eyes open. And there's a website, SUNY Dutchess.edu/Academy of Music. You can find out more there. You can also call. We have a staff, some great people who could take and give you more information. Area code 845-431-8916. This is in the United States. So we have all that, and we're actually doing a big fundraiser because we do offer scholarships. So usually those scholarships are for people 18 and under. But we're doing a virtual benefit online, and you can kind of learn more at our website. So if any of you are curious to kind of like see what that benefit is about and what's involved there, you can see that. You can learn a little bit more about our scholarship program, because if $299 is too much, who knows? I have a team of people, and we can look and see whether you might be in a situation to qualify for a scholarship. Our scholarships tend to be a combination of music potential and talent and need-based. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's something that I've been spending a lot of time on, and I'm really excited about doing this fundraiser scholarship benefit. And so for any of you who are interested and want to look into that, I certainly invite you to join me there. So thank you, everyone. I apologize to those of you whose questions I did not get to, but come back on January 30th, ask your question again, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to get to it. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Be well.